Hello, everybody. Professor Andy Molnar back with you and fun with policy because policy is great. Hey, I've got a treat for you. Next week, I'm actually going to show a DDoS attack on a PowerPoint slide, kind of diagram it, and then discuss some of the security mitigation steps. And then that gives good context to governance and risk management on how policy is important and applied to solve real problems. So I'm kind of excited about that. Now I hope you are too. But let's begin this week, which is chapter 4. Actually, I mentioned chapter 4 was next week. Next week is asset management, where I discuss that. This week is governance and risk management. So again, hello cyber team. Please please make sure you're completing your end of chapter questions as you read the book. Do it while it's fresh in your mind from the readings, lectures, and other work that we're doing during the week, like the discussion board. I'm going to use those questions, some of them, on the final exam. So that's just a note to help you in the final week or two of the course. So here we are, an information security policies domain. It focuses on information security policy requirements and the need to align. What we have to do is align the policy with organizational objectives. That's absolutely essential. Remember, we support the business and provide value to the business. It does no good for us to ensure security, but to cut off a payment system, right? No, keep the cash flowing. In fact, there's a term for that. It's called order to cash. Never interrupt order to cash, right? And so we're really here in a supportive mode. So information security has a domain, and it's going to focus on the government's governance structure necessary to implement and manage good security policy. And so, for example, you might use ISO, the ISO 27000 series. There's a little bit about it on page 93. And it has information security policies. You might go there and take a look. And it addresses policy development, authorization, et cetera, et cetera. And so, and it also addresses governance. Now, in addition, NIST provides guidance. And on page 93, they list some of the references, the special publications. For example, we used a special publication in the discussion board on BYOD last week. An easy Google search will find those. So I think that's exciting. Now, these are the objectives for today's discussion, or this week's discussion. And what I want to start out by saying is that policies, standards, procedures, plans, these are all items we talked about last week, and they exist really for one reason in this hierarchy, all right? And that's to protect the organization and its people, its data from harm, right? So we want to make directives that are codified. To be codified, we need executive company support. It's important that management participate then in the dialogue, in the exchange. We want to ensure visibility as we're creating policies. And we also want to make sure that we are strategically aligning the information security with, as I mentioned, the business needs, right? ISO 27000 series, noted at the bottom of the slide, right, is the information security risk management and it has a 5-stage approach, a methodology that includes risk treatment and risk communication. I'm talking about organizational risk, right, that we want to make sure that we are covering. Now, this slide I like a lot, and as it relates to governance and risk management, I wanted to show you all the domains that information security deals with, right? Blow this up if you have to. All the domains. Think of all the ways that policy either touches one of these or you need to create policy to control or manage one or several of these. It is large, and even this slide is incomplete. I could continue to add things like a research arm, a domain, for example, right? But this is where policy is applied. And I just want you to reflect on that for a minute. Consider the implications of that statement by itself, right? Now, moving on then, as we continue to work on our understanding of policies, what is meant by strategic alignment, right? How do I align information security with the organization above me, right? And there are really several approaches to this. There's a parallel approach, the book will talk about, and an integrated approach. In a parallel approach, information security, it's more discretionary, right? And it assigns responsibility for being secure to the IT department. I do not recommend that. I recommend information security be separate from IT. Remember, IT is about the business. Security needs should be independent of the business decisions, right? We want to recommend good security and let the executives above us make business decisions based on that. The other way to align with strategic approach is in an integrated approach, where it recognizes that security and success are one and the same. And so when we're strategically aligned, security is actually going to function as a business enabler. We end up adding value to the business overall. This is the approach I recommend. I recommend an integrated approach that way. Visible management support should be coupled with, then we develop this written policy, and that's going to formalize and communicate to everybody the company's commitment to information security and yet protect the business value and the things that it's trying to accomplish. Now, there are regulatory requirements that you want to consider in this aligned approach, which is why you want to have a conversation in this integrated fashion, I would offer. Because we all recognize the importance of written security information policy. And a lot of things that Congress has passed, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, HIPAA, FERPA, FISMA, right? They all require covered entities have a written policy in place. So this function, writing security policy, is actually a requirement of the federal government in multiple statutes, right? So it's very important. And when correctly written, the policies are also teaching documents. We've talked previously already about the acceptable use policy document and other associated documents that are specific to a user community, right? What are the rules of the road? How should they act and operate, right? With explanations and examples, right? So you want to make sure that that's covered. In policy, you also want to make sure that, and we'll talk about this more in Chapter 8, but you want to address vendors. You want to have a vendor policy, which should even partner, your vendor security policy should even partner with the procurement side of a company, right? So as the company writes contracts through procurement for security or other vendor services, that the company's policy is built into the contract agreements. Very important, right? And so we want to make sure that we summarize then these policies and address every time we write one the hierarchy, which we covered last week. The guiding principles, the policies, the standards, the baselines, guidelines, procedures, and plans. Those are all items we covered last week. You want to make sure good policy addresses those. You can find an update on page 96 of the book, or refer back to page 55 too. They have more detail about the hierarchy. 'y, as we discussed it. Now, one of the things that Congress has passed, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, HIPAA, FERPA, FISMA, right? They all require covered entities have a written policy in place. So this function, writing security policy, is actually a requirement of the federal government in multiple statutes, right? So when correctly written, the policies are also teaching documents. We have talked previously already about the hierarchy as we discussed it. Now, information security policy then is going to be authorized by executive management. And so we really need them to be part of the process in that integrated approach, which is the one I mentioned that I prefer. Okay. There are some other ways that you can help manage or secure policy. You can invite other third parties to be part of the conversation. That makes for good policy. You want to have somebody audit your policy so that you can ensure consistency in your delivery, and you also would like to approach policy through a maturity model. At my last company, I used NIST. My current company does too. The NIST standard for ensuring security in a formal fashion, a maturity model. There is CMMI, which is the federal government's newest approach to maturity models. And so that's becoming very popular, and it comes with enforcement mechanisms. It's fix all or not, right? Where in previous maturity models, you could fix them over a certain period of time. CMMI has a much more rapid fix rate to it. It's very exciting. There are various maturity models out there. I wouldn't worry about them too much, but I would like to say that I think you'll find them helpful to evaluate and document your processes, right? The military started that process. Just a quick note on audits, right? That you want to make sure if you get an audit that you get an audit report and that it did it based on some standard like ISO 27000 series, right? And you want to make sure the board is aware before you go do that. Now, I thought I had this for next week, but here it is this week. And this is what I want to close part one with. This is a DDoS attack diagrammed, right? How would you manage the risk? And you can see in this approach that this attacker is known as a bot herder, right? They're managing a botnet, which is a bunch of infected computers. And in this scenario, they're waiting to attack a security that I've provided in the cloud, right? Maybe I'm providing WAF security, web application filtering, etc. in the cloud. And so it's going to attack that, and behind the cloud through my security might be some other company like a payment system. So what can happen is the attacker might do a UDP flood attack first, right? And I have the explanation of what a UDP flood attack is there, right? But basically all of these, then if the flood attack doesn't get the effect they want, they may transition quickly to a TCP SYN flood attack. Again, I describe it in the slide. You're welcome to pause this and review that for yourself. And if that doesn't work, even a TCP ACK attack. All of these are based on the three-way handshake that I'm sure you've discussed in other courses, right? So TCP, the layer 3 of the network model, UDP, TCP, and ICMP. TCP ensures a connection-oriented delivery of your traffic, right? So it uses a three-way handshake to establish a reliable connection. And what it's going to do is one sends a SYN, then the other will send a SYN ACK pack back, and the other will send an ACK of that, right? And that's a three-way handshake, right? The server is, think of it, always listening, which puts us at risk. It's a passive open approach for the server, always listening on the port for that connection request from me, the client, right? Before the connection is established. So the three-way handshake is kind of an active open opportunity, right? And it leads to, when a hacker is toying with us, the servers to mismanage or mishandle information, which can lead to them creating escalated privileges, lateral movement, stealing data, and destroying access for other clients. So, which is really what DDoS does. My point on the bottom right of this slide is that we look to governance and risk management uniting this chapter in what we're doing to solve these issues in advance, to justify the tools people, processes, and technology.